Dicker. I'm a communications professor emeritus at St. John Fisher College in Rochester, New York, and it is my pleasure to be able to introduce Dr. Larry Michaelsen. Dr. Michaelsen is a David Ross Boyd Professor Emeritus of Management at the University of Oklahoma, as well as Professor Emeritus at the University of Central Missouri. He's a Carnegie Scholar, a Fulbright Senior Scholar, and former editor of the Journal of Management Education. But to many of his followers, he could best be described as the father of team-based learning. He's got the distinction of developing the small group-based instructional practice that's brought so many of us together. So welcome, Dr. Larry Michaelsen.
Well, thank you.
And thank you for taking the time to join us today. So the legend is that you were teaching at the University of Oklahoma. The budget was cut, and instead of 40 students in a class, you had 120, and you had to find a way to not just resort to lecturing to that big group of students, but there's got to be a lot more to the foundation of how you started with team-based learning than just more students.
Well, I'd always had a lot of group work in my classes, and I always focused on applications because for me, the applications, if just knowing stuff isn't enough. And that's why I chose to teach in a business school. My degree's in organizational psychology, and I could have gone to a psychology department, but they're not about applications. Business schools were. The other thing is I was absolutely convinced that skills were as important as knowledge, skills at working with people, and that can't happen unless you're using groups. And so I'd always used group work, and I developed a lot of skills in using group work. And I didn't want to do away with that because that's where my experience was that the success in my teaching was happening. So I wanted to keep that, and I just had to figure out a way to do it in a bigger class. So
that's the beginning. That was really the beginning. Okay.
That really was the beginning. It just, the difference was doing it in a bigger class.
Right. Okay.
That required doing something different because at that point, with a class of up to 40 students, your physical presence and your ability to interact individually with students is a factor in terms of whether or not they're coming prepared.
Right.
And knew it would not be in a class of 120. I had to have something else.
But how did you actually come up with the structure that involved the readiness assurance process and then the application exercises?
Well, I knew that somehow I had to get the content first, or it wouldn't make any sense to try and apply it. And I have no idea where the idea came from. I just know it was in my head at one point, and I thought, what would happen if? And I was pondering that, and I had a PhD student who was going to do general exams, and so I essentially asked him, what would happen if I did this as part of a general exam question? And I had my own hunches. I didn't really know the answer, but in his general exam, he basically confirmed what my thinking was in terms of what would happen, and it all turned out exactly as I predicted and as he, based on his knowledge of the literature on small groups, predicted, except that it was more powerful even than either one of us thought.
Yeah, so impressive. And it's interesting because we always talk about how hard it is to have students come prepared for class. And one of the things that I did was we did a practice IRAD, TRAD, an application exercise in one of my classes just so I could show them what it was they needed to do. And of course, hardly anybody had read the material or done any of the other things they needed to do to prepare. So it kind of dawned on them. But I think I took a little bit of the pressure off by saying, well, this is just going to be a practice one. But I think it made the point anyway.
Well, I learned over the years that my most effective way to get the message across was give them the syllabus and then give them a test over the syllabus on the first day of class, and said, this is your practice.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, depending on where the class is structured, the next time we meet, it's for real. And here's the content you're going to be tested on.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I've seen the video that you have up on how you introduce students to TBL, but did you feel the same pushback from students, fellow faculty, administrators when you first started using this process? I mean, a
Yeah,
lot of us have found that happening, right?
sure.
Mhm.
I did, no question, and felt it. Well, it was really interesting. I was going to say I felt it every semester, but it got after a couple of semesters, it was so clear to me that the process would take care of itself that although it was there, I didn't care. I mean, I just said, trust me, it's going to work.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it did.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a while for that sort of thing to sink in. So, did you start with? I know you said you were already working with groups, but did you start with just using parts of TBL in your
No,
class,
no, the whole thing,
the
right from
whole
the
thing, and
yeah.
also like for the whole semester, like no, you not broken up into units where sometimes you used it or not.
No, I did it. I went in whole hog,
Mhm.
and I got better at it, and partly because I began to understand what was happening.
Mhm.
I just didn't realize I didn't realize what I had, and over time I learned what I had.
Mhm. What do you recommend for new faculty? Do you think they need to jump in with both feet, or do you think they should just try bits and pieces along the
I,
way?
Bits and pieces won't give you the power, and
Mhm.
my suggestion is try it as nearly as possible to exactly like it's prescribed.
Mhm.
The two problems I see with people who do dabble in a sense is one of the things they either have such good success with dabbling that they presume dabbling is it, and they don't ever go further because it's so much better than what they experienced, or it can happen that they hit something that they really don't like and they quit.
Mm. Right. Or they get so much pushback from, again, from students or
Yeah.
administrators too. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, given the current state of higher ed administration, where there are a lot of budget cuts, there's reliance on so many adjunct faculty, and people are just being pressured to do more with less. How do you think people can use team-based learning in that kind of an environment where it just seems like it's hard to find the time to do anything, much less change the way that you're teaching?
Well, the one really nice thing about team-based learning is that you can do it in a bigger classes and it works just fine.
Mhm.
Uh, so that is an advantage for people that is automatically built in. The other one is there's so many more resources now than there ever were before. Uh, that when I started, it was me, and that was it. And I had
Mhm.
no resources, but except what I had learned from my experience working with groups in a variety of settings, and what I knew from the small groups literature. I didn't know any of the education literature.
Mhm.
In fact, when I started, if you went to ERIC, which was the only place you could do computer searches, if you plugged in combination of groups and teaching, you got a class at a time. That's the
Mhm.
only thing you got. It was individual instruction
Mhm.
or class instruction, which they called group instruction.
Mhm. So what do you think is the best approach? I mean, how would, say, a junior faculty member coming into a situation where they really want to use team-based learning, but how do they sell it to their administrators other than, I mean, I'm not sure you want to say, well, I'll just have more students in my class
Well,
because I
no,
can
no.
teach this way.
I'd say, look, here's my teaching philosophy. I
Mhm.
think it's absolutely important to teach people how to use material, not just to know what it is, and to think deeply, and to solve problems, and to work with others. And if I lecture, most of that's not going to happen.
Right.
And if you look at the employment, all the stuff there is out there about what employers want in their students, almost none of it can be achieved with lectures. And so the question isn't, should I lecture or not? The answer is no, I shouldn't. The question is, what should I do? And here's what I want to do.
And the most recent surveys are showing that ability to work in teams is the #1 skill that employers are looking for in their new hires. So we can use that also as a really good argument.
Yeah, one of the interesting pieces of research that we did but never got published, because the graduate student who was working with it ended up, I can't remember, I think it was a young woman whose family moved and she didn't ever finish, but she was a master's student but was collecting the data, and it was so muddy in terms of what are these soft skills and interpersonal skills and people skills. And so in the local area here in Kansas City, what she did was it looked at the hiring flyers from many organizations. I don't remember the total, but anyone that had something about people skills, she called up the organization and said, who would I talk to who could tell me what's meant by this? And they used their phrase, whatever it was. Okay. And then they connected her with the person that they connected them, that they thought would best know that. And usually it was somebody who was actually in the line of doing the work. And they said, can you give me an example where, and they used their words, whatever it was, when this was present and either good things happened or it was not present and bad things happened. Okay. And so that was letting them think of actual situations. And the vast majority of those was, well, we had this problem. We got people together to make a decision and they talked and they made a decision. And either they got, we learned that was really great because the group did a great job, or later we learned that it didn't work and that somebody had suggested or in their mind came to the meeting with ideas that would have worked that didn't. That didn't get, their ideas didn't get accepted. So it was essentially creating a situation that happens every day, multiple times in a team-based learning classroom, where we have to decide on something and we get feedback on it.
And she was using those behavior-based questions that our students are going to be asked when they get to an interview. So tell me about a time, when you had to work in a team and things didn't go so well. And
what did you work in a team? Tell me about a time where communication skills were important. And the person then brought up the example of working in a team. Or if it was people skills, tell me about a time where people skills was important. And then they would talk about usually a group situation where a group was making a decision.
So how do you think the move to so much online and remote learning has kind of impacted team-based learning in terms of, I know what you're going to, I saw that look on your face.
In terms of conducting the education process, I think team-based learning has been remarkably successful in an online environment. I'm not surprised, but if I have my preferences, I would never do it that way. And because the really, really important things still get made in a face-to-face group meeting. And that's where I want my students to be as much as possible. Right.
And I think that was really part of the difficulty of moving online, was that the students didn't have the experience either with working remotely, a lot of them. So even if you told them that they had to have a group meeting, say in a breakout room on Zoom, they didn't know what to say or how to, it just isn't the same as having that face-to-face.
It ultimately it is, but it just takes longer and there are more potential glitches.
Right. So is there anything looking back that you wish you'd known when you were really starting out on this journey?
Wow, that's a neat question. I think that the only thing that I can think of is I wish I would have known as much as I know about the power that it creates. Because one of the things that struck me in my recent conversations with kind of the old timers, we bring up an issue and say, here's an issue. And it's like, trust the process, it's going to work. I mean, you just know it is, because you've seen it time after time after time after time. And if somebody has a problem, you almost always can put your finger right on what the problem is. And it's something they've done in terms of the way they've implemented the process.
Well, one thing I've noticed is that it seems like it's easier to win the students over. I mean, they're in it and they're with you, and you kind of you've told them, I mean, you have some authority as a professor, so you kind of say, this is how the class is going to run, and they've got to go with it, right? It's the colleagues, who insist on lecturing, and you say, but this engages the students, this brings them prepared for class, and it's just too different from the way I like to teach, is the thing I like to hear. That to me is the most frustrating.
Well, that is very frustrating. And more frustrating than that is the administrators who, I mean, literally, I had one dean, and that's why I left the University of Oklahoma. I had a dean whose idea of teaching was captured in his phrase platform skills.
Okay.
And he just didn't understand. Didn't understand. Nor did he understand the importance of allowing students to make mistakes and learn from their mistakes. Because I mean, this goes beyond team-based learning, but I developed an approach where students actually took 3 core courses in the business school, and a fourth was a lab, where in the lab, 6 teams of 6, 5, I guess usually 5 teams of 6 or 7 would form a company, get a real money loan, do an actual startup business. I mean, we're talking real money and a real startup business, and then do a community service project with the profits. And so, boy, they were out there in the real world trying to do stuff, and they would make mistakes, and most of those turned out to be wonderful, wonderful learning experiences. But the dean would say, well, how could you ever let him make that mistake? And he actually, and one of the reasons I left is because he ended up essentially firing an adjunct who was teaching in the program, because the students had made a mistake. But that was the most valuable thing that happened the entire semester for that group of students.
Yeah.
And that was just sad.
Right.
And I said, I just can't live this situation anymore. So I went to a place who really wanted to do that program and who would support it, and did.
Yeah.
If I have any advice to anybody, it's just trust the process.
Trust the process.
If you follow it, it just is so consistently produces the outcomes you want. And probably in my talk, I'm going to talk about a little bit about why that is. That why does this process do so consistently produce the outcomes you want? And it's not always obvious to people why it's happening, but I'll probably spend a little time kind of at least offering my suggestions as to why that occurs.
Excellent. So giving us even more to look forward to the conference. So Dr. Larry Michaelsen, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us a little insight into what you're going to be talking about at the conference.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to do it.
All right. Thank you.